Leslie, thank you so much for coming on to She Leads. I am so excited to have you on the show and just get to know you more and learn from you. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. One of the side brands that I use is Lead Like a Girl. And I always love having conversations about leadership in general, but with women, it's just like there's a deeper level of connection. So
couldn't agree more.
Really happy to be here.
Yeah. So Leslie, okay, so you are a facilitator, a keynote speaker, a communication expert for individuals and organizations to reach their peak performance, whether that's in leadership, team building, or even just talking through a conflict that arises at work. And even before this, you have experience in project management, sales and marketing. You are a producer for a local TV news network. And last but definitely not least, you are a U.S Army veteran, and where you served as a captain and a pilot. So first, thank you so much for your service.
Aww.
And yeah, so let's get started back to West Point. When you went to West Point, what drew you to West Point, being in the U.S Army? Was this in your family or just what? Yeah, tell me that desire.
Yeah, it was, my dad had been in the Army on the enlisted side, but before I was born, so it was never something that like influenced the way I thought. Okay. I had my mom's uncle was a Pearl Harbor survivor. So I knew a little bit about that. Yeah. And he was, tough as nails, as you can imagine, and was a pretty big influence in my life. Always there for me, and just a great guy. But none of that particularly played into me wanting to be in the military. What happened was one summer I was on vacation on the East Coast with my parents, and my dad, because we lived near a naval base, that's where I grew up, China Lake, Ridgecrest, California, my dad wanted to go visit the Naval Academy. And as a 14, 15-year-old girl, my job was to pout and complain, which I did amazingly, in the backseat of our rental car, just arms folded like, this is stupid. And so we drive up, he parks the car, and he's like, look, kid, you have two choices. You can go on this tour with us and see the Naval Academy, or you can sit in this car. It's 102 degrees outside, so I'd recommend you not stay in the car. Right. So I got out, and I begrudgingly went with them on the tour. And it was the part of the summer where the new class of midshipmen were already there and starting their training to become plebes in the Corps of Midshipmen. I don't know the lingo for the Navy guys because I was a cadet, but I saw it. And when I was watching it unfold, I turned to my mom with like big eyes, and I'm like, Mom, there's girls in there. And she's like, yeah. And I said, well, could I do that? And she was like, sure, if that's what you want to do. And I don't think either of us necessarily knew that that was like the moment that changed everything, but it was. Mm-hmm. And my mom encouraged me, even though I loved to play sports, but I wasn't super athletic. I wasn't a great runner or anything. And I had never talked about the military, but from that day on, I was obsessed. I applied to every academy. I went to summer programs, and that was kind of the start of my path forward.
Wow. So this was at 14 years old, where it just like almost a switch flipped, and you were like, this is what I want to do. Incredible. Yeah. And your parents were obviously supportive, and they were more than happy to kind of
I think they were, they were surprised because it didn't seem like something that necessarily would be my jam.
Yeah.
But I think what made me want to do it was this whole idea of like teamwork and camaraderie. Because there was a particular thing on the tour where they talked about this event that happens for the midshipmen where they climb this like greased post basically, and whoever gets the hat off the top has, good luck or whatever. But the only way to be the person who gets it is like there has to be some level of teamwork because you can't do it by yourself.
Right.
It's a competition, but you got to work together. And that complexity of I want to win, but I also want to be part of a team was fascinating to me, even back then.
I love it. I could definitely relate as a soccer player, so I love that. So Tell me now your experience at West Point and even serving in the Army. What were big challenges you faced, and just like what did you learn from this overall experience?
So I went to the academy. My first summer was after I graduated high school in 1993. Okay. And women were admitted into the academy in 1975 is when it was approved. And so the first class showed up in 1976. And so in my mind, that was like forever ago. And so it was like, now women are there. That's just how it is. And so I remember showing up, and the first real interaction I had with someone was after I was in my room, and you're not allowed to like step into the hallway because you'll get yelled at by the upperclassmen. So you just kind of hang out and wait until it's time that you have to. But I could hear someone in the room next to me, and I knew it was going to be someone that was in my squad. So like this person was going to be one of my teammates for the summer. And I wanted to go over and like help him get set up. So like fold his clothes, make his bed, like do all that stuff. So I go over there and I help with everything, hanging up his clothes and getting stuff all straightened out. And it was time for me to like leave and go back to my room. So I opened the door and put one foot in the hallway, which meant I was committed. I couldn't turn back around because if a upperclassman saw you whiffle waffle like that, you know, they'd come yell at you. Mm. So he waited until my foot was in the hallway and I couldn't turn around. And he said, by the way, just so you know, I don't think women belong here. Mm-hmm. And I just remember thinking, like, I wanted to go back and just tear up everything I just helped him with, but I didn't. And then I also remember thinking, like, really? Like, it's 1993. People still think that way? And of course, as an adult now, I realize there's still people that think that way, which is shocking to me, but it didn't matter. I was there, so he had to just deal with it.
So that's, yeah, even hearing that story, it's insane. So in that moment, though, did you ever have doubts being like, maybe I'm not strong enough, or like the perception that's out there, maybe it's true, or that I shouldn't be here? Did you ever have those personal doubts, or how did you almost get through that, being like, no, I deserve to be here?
Such a good question. And like, I'm trying to think back to like my mindset when I was in it. I think it always would like, all the doubts would come to the surface, like, oh my God, like, what if I can't make it? Or what if I, you know, but it just, all it did was made me resolve to do my best, be my strongest. And if I wasn't meant to be there, the system would kick me out. Like, I would not make it. But for the moment, a congressman thought I was qualified to be there. A panel of people who evaluated all my documents and, you know, my past accomplishments decided. So I always chose to believe that if I'm here, I'm meant to be here. Mm-hmm. Even if there's people that don't agree, I don't have to listen to them. Yeah. So I remember my dad telling me before I left, he goes, listen, you're going to have a lot of people in your face. There will be people yelling at you, people that don't believe in you, people that don't like you. You can do whatever you need to on the outside to survive, like smile, nod, salute, whatever, but they can't control what you're thinking. So always pick the thoughts that are going to get you through. And I think that's what I relied on, was like in that moment, like I had a choice. Do I believe this nonsense that he's saying, or do I believe all the other people that helped me get there? So I chose that.
That's amazing. And that lesson alone is so valuable for so many people, whether like at Stanford, for instance, there's a big thing about the imposter syndrome and thinking that you don't belong. So just, I think it's all about what you're telling yourself and just believing yourself. I think that's so important. So that obviously wasn't the first time where you were doubted for your abilities, or whether it's gender or just abilities as a pilot. So I love this story that you told in one of your TED Talks. And I think I know you know which one I'm talking about. So I'd love for you to just share it and just the lessons that you learned from there and almost, beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I would consider it one of my signature stories because it shaped me so much, and not always in good ways, but eventually I think in the long run, I'm so glad that I lived through this moment because it was sort of devastating. So you have to remember, like, graduating from West Point, you feel 10 feet tall and bulletproof. Like, I can do anything. I'm amazing. I got my first choice of branches, which was aviation. So I like tootled on down to Fort Rucker, Alabama. I was in flight school. Things were going pretty well. And then every once in a while, you're required to take what's called a check ride, which is an assessment on your flying abilities. So how are your skills as a pilot? So I failed a check ride, which I'm sure you know, going to Stanford, you probably put way more pressure on yourself than other people put on you. And if you get a B-, you're like, what did I do? Or, it's like you feel that, like you didn't do your best. And so I was really upset that I had failed this check ride. And I worked hard, I passed it, but a little bit later I had to take another check ride and I ended up failing that one too. And so because I had failed 2 check rides, I had to go in front of this lieutenant colonel who was in charge of the flight school, and he was basically going to determine whether or not I got a second chance to go finish flight school. And I got to the appointment, and I stood outside, and I could just remember, like, my heart was racing. My mouth was dry. Like, I was sweating up a storm. I'm sure it was like middle of summer. It was just, oh God, everything was just hard. Everything felt scary. So I had to do the official, knock, knock, knock. And he called me to enter, and I stood in front of him, and he had this big, massive wood desk, and he's sitting behind it all stern. And he, is looking through my file, and he's like, Lieutenant Stein, I've decided to let you stay. And I remember this sense of relief. I kind of let my guard down because I was I'd been holding my breath for 3 days while I was waiting for this meeting to happen. And so it was like, oh my gosh, I felt better. And I think it's because of that letdown that what he said next hit me so hard because I just wasn't ready for it. So right after he said, I've decided to let you stay, before I even had a chance to like let that fully soak in, he said, but I sure feel sorry for the unit that gets you because you are a liability, not an asset. Now get out of my office. Like, it froze me up because it had all these thoughts in my head, like, am I really a liability? And if I am, what a burden I'm going to be on this next unit. And so I had to work double hard, and I always felt like I had to prove myself because in my head, he had no way of knowing this, but he created this recording, I'm a liability, I'm a liability, I'm a liability.
Yeah.
And I stopped seeing it as just about what my pilot skills were, but I started feeling it everywhere in my life. And so it took me a long time to like silence that recording and realize that I'm not a liability. And that working harder because I had failed actually made me an asset. Mm-hmm. But I would say it was a solid decade of feeling internally like a liability before I could start questioning that thought. Yeah. And so now I like to tell that story for anyone who might find themselves thinking, and I go back to like what my dad told me, like, you can't control outside, but you can control in here. Yeah. Change the recording.
Oh, it's so true. So in that moment, first, did you share that with other people? Like, did anyone else know that he said that or that you felt that way? Or is this something you kind of just dealt with internally? Because I know based on your talk that it's true. Like, you had that recording, I'm a liability, liability. And it changed almost who you are as a person with everything you did until finally you realized, no, wait, like, I'm an asset. I can be who I am. So, yeah.
Yeah, when it first happened, I mean, I think at least my experience of, like, being ashamed or being just embarrassed that was how he perceived me. And I assumed because he was high ranking, he had authority, that he must be right.
Right.
So it never occurred to me to question that thought. And typically, at least when I was younger, not so much anymore, and when I have those moments of like being ashamed or embarrassed, I wanted as few people as possible to know what I had just experienced. Mm-hmm. And so I think I told my roommate, because we were really good friends, and I probably had a really good cry about it, and she fed me a pint of Ben & Jerry's, as a good roommate would. And then I just wanted to put it behind me and not talk about it.
Right.
So I think if I told anyone else, it would be like the coach that I worked with years later and beyond. Yeah. But no one I knew, I was too embarrassed to tell them.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit, before we move on to being a producer at a local TV news and beyond that, how was it being a female pilot and just a female in the Army? Did you continue to feel those injustices and just feeling like, okay, like you almost start to learn, okay, there is a gap between males and females, and especially in that industry, would you say?
Sure. There was a piece of advice or something that somebody said to my roommate that I was roommates with in flight school, that she shared with me as a cadet. And it always was in the back of my mind, but I didn't know what to do with it. Okay. And it was something that a male cadet said to her, and that was, you will never be treated equally. You will be treated better or you will be treated worse, but don't ever expect to be treated equally. And so having that in the back of my mind, I was just, hoping obviously for the better, but I will say I had some of both experiences in the Army. So there were units that I went to that, like, the commander was like, I don't like having women in the unit, and I think you're a slacker, or it's not fair that your PT standards, your physical fitness test standards are lower or different. Yeah. And so there were definitely those assignments. And that made me want to get out. So I had already decided I was going to leave the military. And then my last assignment came along. And a guy that I had been stationed with at my first duty station, who knew what a good officer I was, or he perceived me to be anyway, when he saw my name on the roster, he went to the battalion commander and said, I want her in my unit. I will skip the next 3 people that come in. They can go to the other unit. I want her. Wow. And so he brought me in, and there was this like golden halo over me because he sacrificed having someone in the position that I would be filling for months because he wanted me. And he would rather have a dip in performance for a short term because he believed that I would be, what we call like a force multiplier to the unit. And so he believed in me, which made me believe in me, which made me show up and really want to do that for him. And that's where I really started to unravel the story of being a liability. Yeah. And so I started to see what he saw in me. And that unit treated me like gold. Everything I did, they listened to me, they respected me. My going away gift wasn't the standard gift that they got everyone because they knew it wouldn't suit me. They got me flowers and purple towels and season 4 of Sex and the City in this pretty basket. And they're like, this is what we know you will enjoy.
I love it. I love it. I think that's great. Because yeah, at the end of it, you realize, no, I'm an asset. I can be myself. I can be the girl where I want to express my love for pink and all of that. So I think that's
Right.
incredible. So, okay, so now leaving the military, walk me a little bit through your career trajectory, leading to where you are now.
Okay, so it's definitely a winding path, and it's one of those things where I tell people, I'm like, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but I wouldn't not recommend it either, because it's got a little bit of everything. So I got out of the Army, and I didn't know what like business was. Like I knew what a lawyer was, I knew what a doctor was, I knew what a teacher was, but that was about it. Yeah. And so I just started exploring things that sounded interesting. So my first job was as a TV news producer for a small local channel and a CBS affiliate in Savannah, Georgia. So I did that for several months, and then I realized like Savannah wasn't for me. The job of TV news producer was very repetitive, more so than I thought. So I'm like, that's not really for me. So then I went into a sales job because people had always told me I had a sales personality. I'm like, I didn't know what that meant, but I figured I should check it out. So I did sales for 6 months, and I'm like, get me the hell out of here. So I stopped doing sales, and I ended up going into a trade association, which I didn't even know what that was when I heard about it. But basically, everything you can imagine in the world has an association. There's an association for pharmacists, an association for florists, an association for any kind of business has an association that lobbies for them, helps them with certifications, and does all this stuff. So I entered into one in the mortgage banking industry called the Mortgage Bankers Association. And I went there as a content developer. I helped them create classes. I ended up being a project manager. I worked in a couple different departments. I really loved it. I loved the people I worked with. But at the same time, it was around the time it was 2007. So right before the 2008 downturn in the economy, which I think is important to the story. And anyone who might be listening that's like, we're in a pandemic. How the hell am I going to start a business now? Trust and believe it can be done. Yeah. So I was in the Mortgage Bankers Association. My boss at the time said, we're going to have a series of very difficult conversations about what departments have to give up funding, what people are going to keep funding, what projects should we do, and what do we have to stop doing. I need you to lead those conversations. So I quickly went on to my best friend Google and found a facilitation course. I took that. I came back. I led these conversations, very rough around the edges at first, but I got a lot of experience having very, very hard conversations with people who were scared, frustrated, angry at the situation, hiding things, all of the stuff that you would hope leaders don't do, but they tend to do when times get tough, right? So I guided all those conversations, and eventually, with all the cuts and the economy turning down in 2008, I did get laid off from that job. But my boss had sent me to so much good training that I had set myself up to then be an entrepreneur and help people have the kind of conversations that I had helped do internally at that association. Yeah. So I started doing that, and it just kind of took off from there, and that's what I've been doing for the last 12 years.
Amazing. Oh, it's so cool. So what are some lessons? So for instance, I know you talk a lot about almost having that confidence to speak up. And it's not where you need to wait for your environment to change, but rather when you speak up, you allow the environment to change. And I think this is very relevant, especially for people like my age who are going into these new workplaces and they feel like a little belittled almost to speak up, and they don't have that confidence. So what advice can you give in that regard?
Man, I got chills when you said that, because it's so funny. Literally, as a facilitator, and I'm someone who gets called into organizations from the outside. So I'm not an insider. I don't know the politics. And in that situation, I ask a lot of what look like on the surface really dumb questions. And I always tell them, I'm like, look, I'm the dumbest one in the room when it comes to your inside process. But what I know is human dynamics. And I'm not going to, I will hold a mirror up for you and show you where things aren't working. What I need from you is when I ask a question that's a dumb question that isn't useful to you, let's chuck it out the window. But when I ask a dumb question that you haven't asked because you have too much experience to ask it, let's go there. And so what I would offer to people who are, beginning new careers, are new in an environment that they're not familiar with, is that there's a period of time where you get to be the one asking the dumb questions that are actually super useful, because everyone who's reached a certain point doesn't even know to think those questions anymore. Right. They've forgotten how to be curious about, why are we still doing this? Or does this actually make sense in the current environment? So to me, it's a skill. And I love being that person or having that role as an outsider coming in. And so I call it like the newbie mindset. Like, embrace the crap out of the time that you're a newbie and ask all the dumb questions, because eventually that time will run out and people won't take them as well, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah.
So is that something that you're coaching the leaders of the organization to make sure your newbies are comfortable speaking up? Or is that something where the leaders don't even have to recognize it, but just the newbie should be the one where they're speaking up? Does that make sense? Like, should there be an alignment? Yeah.
In an ideal world, the leaders would know to create that environment.
Right.
But I have noticed that a lot of organizations don't hire me to create the ideal world. They hire me to fix a problem. And so I usually, whenever I get the chance, I tell leaders, hey, tap into your newbies and what they know. But I also tell the newbies, don't wait for the leaders to be smart about this. Yeah. Like, they don't know what they don't know. They've forgotten how to be a newbie. And you're the only one who can tell them, because you're the person coming in at this point in history, you know, with your knowledge and skill set and your hunger to learn. So if it feels scary to ask a question because you're not sure it's dumb, just phrase it that way. Be like, I'm a little nervous to ask this, but I'm really curious. Yeah. Why do we do it this way? If you ask it from curiosity, it comes across much better than if you ask it like, why are these idiots doing it? And people can sense a silent you idiot even if you don't say it.
Yeah. And almost, what I got from that too, it's not only curious, but also being vulnerable and just being like, look, I don't know why you guys, like, I don't know this, so can someone help me? So I think that's great.
Well, and that's, yeah. I love that you picked up on the vulnerability piece of it. To me, that's one of the greatest gifts a leader at the top or a new person coming in at the bottom, who I still view as a leader, just from a different seat, is that vulnerability. Because what I've noticed is the first person in the room, it's like the hardest for that person to be vulnerable, but it like turns the faucet on for everyone else to say, I had the same question, or, oh man, I was wondering this. And so people start being vulnerable when one person does it, right? We can't wait for someone. We have to be willing to be that first person.
Definitely. So another thing that my research has shown is that you are a big adventure junkie and you love challenges. So walk me through two things. One, your mindset when you approach a challenge, and almost like your exhilaration when you encompass a new challenge. And also for others too, when they approach a challenge, but also the idea of risk taking and failure and just all of those three together. Like, what's your outlook on that?
Wow, that's such a good question. I think there's a lot of like memes out there or like models that show it. It's like success and failure are not opposites. And failure is actually a part of success. The reason people look like overnight successes is because they learn from the failures that came before the public success. Definitely. So when I take on like a new challenge, the one that comes to mind was this ridiculous thing that I did a few years ago. So in 2013, I decided that I wanted to do a half Ironman. Okay. I had always dreamt of trying it. It sounded scary. This isn't even the challenge, by the way. This is just step one. Okay. So I had a trainer at the time, and I was like, can I do this? And she's like, yes, but not tomorrow. Like, pick one 6 to 9 months away. Yeah. So I did. She trained me. I finished. I felt like the queen of the world that day. Like, I felt when I crossed the finish line like I could do anything. So that was May of 2013. And I was like, there are people that do those kind of races and they're like, I am a half Ironman for life. I will do one of these every 6 months. And then there's people that are like, well, that box is checked. I'm good on that. And that was more my take on it. Like, I don't need to do another one. One was enough. So I came off of that and I went back into kind of just like an everyday training mode where I might like run, 3 or 4 miles, might go to a spin class. Like, I worked out still a fair amount, but nothing crazy. No like half marathons, no 50-mile bike rides, anything like that. So Thanksgiving comes around and I always go home to my hometown and stay with my best friend. And that particular year, Thanksgiving fell on a weekend where December 1st was on the weekend after Thanksgiving. And there's this race that gets run on the first Sunday of December every year. So every 7 years, it's on Thanksgiving weekend, what happened to occur that weekend. That's a ultramarathon, which I had never even heard of that. I'm like, what's it, like, how far is an ultramarathon? So I showed up to the turkey trot that we do in town, which is like, a 5K, like not that big of a deal. Yeah. Just to put this in perspective, my town doesn't even charge money for the turkey trot. It's by donation. There's no medals. There's no T-shirts. The winner gets a rubber chicken. That's my hometown. Okay. But they have this world-class ultramarathon that gets run every year. So I'm at the 5K for turkey trot, and someone's like, hey, you did an Ironman this year, or a half Ironman. Why don't you do the ultra? And I'm like, how far is that? And he's like, well, there's a 30K and a 50K. So I'm trying to, I'm like 30K in my head. I'm doing a calculation. I'm like 18 miles or something. That's like a long, no, God, why would I do that? That's farther than the half marathon I had to run for the Ironman.
Yeah.
So I said no. So I go home with my friend. I get curious. I like log on. I find the website. I'm like, oh, this does look kind of fun. And so I come out and I'm like, I tried to register, but it's closed because the event is so close.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, we live in a small town, right? She's like, who's the event coordinator? I'm like, Terry, whatever. And I said the last name, and she goes, that's my next door neighbor. So her husband walks me over. We knock on the door. I have my checkbook. I'm like, can I enter the race? I write a check. I give her the check. So now this is Friday. So Thursday, I found out about the race. Friday, I registered for the race. Saturday is packet pickup. So I go to the Catholic church where they're having the spaghetti dinner before the race, and a lot of people do, get good carbo loading.
Yeah.
And as I'm in line, the hype is starting to, people are like, this is going to be awesome and amazing. And I'm with my best friend, who is not a runner. I used to have to drag them to the 5Ks. Now they go willingly. But, I look at her and I'm like, this might sound crazy. I signed up for the 30K, but I think I might want to try the 50K. Because there was a longer distance, right? So this is 31 miles. So
wow.
Is that crazy? And she looks at me. She's like, I can't even, you got to do this on your own, man. I can't tell you that. Yes, it's crazy, right? So I get up to the counter and I'm like, what would it take to change from the 30K to the 50K? And they're like, $5. You just give us $5 and you can upgrade. And I'm like, so I give them $5. And I show up to the race the next morning. By the way, so I go home with my friend. We stop at CVS. I get jelly beans and I had ice cream for dinner. I make a playlist. It's just the most weird prep you've ever seen for a race. Yeah. I don't know what I'm getting myself into. I've never done this. And I said to her, I'm like, this is the beauty of the line of work that I do. I use storytelling in a lot of my keynotes, a lot of my facilitation.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I'm either going to have a great race or a great story. If I finish it, epic. I can talk about it. If I don't finish it, I can talk about why wasn't 30K enough? Why did I have to go for the most, the biggest, why couldn't I just be happy doing the 30K? So I can't lose here. No matter what, I win tomorrow. So she's like, you're crazy, get in the car. So I go to the start line, and there's these two guys in front of me, and they're talking about their friend Mary, and they're like, man, Mary's been training like a beast for this. I know she ran 50 miles a week. Yeah, whatever. They're talking, and I start thinking about what I've been doing for the last 6 months. And I'm like, Mary ran 50 miles last week. I ran 6. Not at one time, by the way, 3 times 50 miles. So I'm starting to get panicked. What have I done by committing to this?
Yeah.
So I start running, and immediately my foot starts to hurt. And I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be a long day if I have a sore foot for 50 kilometers. So I'm like, foot, what do you need from me? And it was like my foot started talking to me. I need you to run a different way. Stop running on your toes, use a better gait. And so I changed the way I was running, and the pain went away. Okay. And I was like, I'm just going to do that the whole day. Whenever my body hurts, I'm just going to ask it what it needs. And I did. And I made it to mile 10, mile 20, I get into the middle of the desert. I'm at mile 23, and all of a sudden I hit the wall. Yeah. Marathoners talk about the wall, and you're just like, ugh. So I'm running, and I started having this thought, what if the wall's not real? What if it's only real because we believe in it? And do I have to believe in it right now? So I started thinking of, instead of a big wall, I'm like a little retaining wall in someone's front yard. So I start thinking about it, then I'm laughing, then I start leaping over this little wall, and pretty soon my body stops hurting. So it's my mind just went to different places. So I always talk about this story. I did finish the race. I got my medal. It was amazing.
Wow.
And I always, when I talk about this race, the thing that makes me grateful is that I signed up before my mind had a chance to tell me it wasn't possible.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times the anticipation, or we're waiting and we're like, you know what, no, I can't do it. And we back up. But that initial yes is what's true. And we unconvince ourselves. We back away from it and convince ourselves that's not true.
Yeah. Oh, that's so amazing. I love that story. I think that's a great story. Because it's just the power of the mind and our mentality. It's so important in everything we do. Any challenge, any task, anything. So I think that's great. So, okay, before I think, okay, before we go to our fun questions, I do want to touch a little bit, which I think draws on the lessons you've learned. But just being a female, as you said, today there's still these disparities amongst men and women, and in many industries. So when you coach these female leaders, what do you tell them to make sure that no, it's not, it's like how you perceive yourself is really what you project almost. Mm-hmm. And yeah, just like give me a little advice about being a female leader and what all females should do when they go into something.
I mean, I'm always careful to give advice to all of anybody because even though I have experiences and I can share my personal stories with you and hope to inspire you to find your way, because certainly no one was telling me, be a news producer, then go into sales. Like, I had to find that weird ass path by myself. Yeah. But there was a lot of women along the way that cheered me on, that gave me a hand, that offered advice, that bought me lunch when I was like a broke new entrepreneur. And so I suggest to other women that I'm coaching, find yourself those women. Find the woman who's 100 steps ahead of you on the path and learn from her in her books, her videos, her tutorials, whatever. Find a woman who's 20 steps ahead of you and start shaping your 5-year plan based on that. Yeah. Find a woman who's 2 steps ahead of you and ask her a crap ton of questions because she remembers the part of the journey that you're in. Yes. And so really build your network and at the same time, look back. Who are you 2 steps ahead of? Because when you start offering help to other people, like it starts to make all of it make more sense because you realize you're never done. The person 100 steps ahead of you was behind you at some point. They're just farther along in their journey right now. Yeah. So build that network, give back, always reach back and help other women, and just make time for conversations like this. Like, reach out, ask for the big things, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I love it. Oh, I love it so much. So also, Leslie, it's funny, I don't know who I heard this from, but one person said how when you look at your career, you think of, it's very common for the worst thing to happen to you to be also the best thing. And I think like when you tell me that story about what the lieutenant colonel said to you, how you're a liability, you're not an asset, like that shaped your career in a way, you could say. And like it taught you so much. So I think it's incredible.
Well, and then it was the basis of doing a TEDx talk. Exactly. Like that was one of my dreams.
Exactly.
So he helped me get there.
Yeah. So Leslie, tell me, what is a passion or hobby that you have that's just completely unrelated to your work?
Right now, it is making homemade bread, sourdough. So I've made, this is like new in the pandemic, right?
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
bread. And I just, for the first time, made sourdough cinnamon rolls. And I am obsessed. It's just fun. It's hard. It's a lot of work, but it's super fun.
I love it. My sister makes challah bread, and it's so good. So I definitely relate. Yeah, that's great. Okay, the next question is, what is a fun or weird talent that you have that no one else really knows about? So I'm going to give you mine. All right. So I love blueberry throwing. I'm a good blueberry thrower catcher. So here we go. Here's a blueberry. All right. Let's see. There we go.
That was magic. I love that you can like demonstrate it. Man, I can't demonstrate mine, but this is like, I don't know how I even realized this, but I can run in any shoe. And I think it's because every once in a while I would plan not so well for my trips when I'm going to speak or whatever and not leave enough time. So I've had to run through airports in heels, flip-flops, boots, tennis shoes, like, you know, wedges, like you name it, I have run in it. And I have not hurt myself. I'm amazed how fast I can go in a pair of flip-flops or kitten heels. Like, it's crazy.
That's pretty impressive and probably pretty useful, I can imagine. That's great. I love it. Well, Leslie, thank you so much. It's been so much fun, and I've learned so many lessons, so I'm just so excited for other people to learn from as well. So really, thank you so much.
You are so welcome. You're an awesome human, and I am excited to see what you do in the world.
Thank you. Thank you.